wanted to really try to work through a few points on the budget process and the calls on trying to get to a bipartisan negotiated budget. Earlier this year, we've seen with Senate Republicans, we worked through a few supplementals as we saw earlier this year, got to some landing spots, and not everybody agreed on all the specifics, but we were able to pass them. And then unfortunately at the beginning of this process on the budget, that a lot of our subcommittee chairs, when the budgets were first proposed on the Senate side, didn't see them before the subcommittee hearings, didn't have enough information, didn't even have Senate fiscal analysis in a lot of the subcommittees. And then and that's been the challenge along, is getting that information that's back. When the budget bills arrived on the Senate floor, Senate Republicans offered 175 suggestions, amendments. The majority party voted all of them down. We offered a lot of these as ways of saying that these are landing spots that we could get to whether it's investing in roads, paying down debt, doing additional investments in terms of clean water infrastructure, and trying to build on what we did in a bipartisan way last year. A few of the amendments got some slight bipartisan support, but all of them failed with every on fairly partisan lines. Since that time, in the Consensus Revenue Estimating Conference, our minority vice chairs have reached out to the subcommittee chairs. I know Vice Chair Bumstead has reached out, the chair, and has we had some meetings about a month ago, and it's been a little lacky, in providing a list of information we'd like to see in some of the different budgets. We've provided that information on saying that we'd like to make sure that some of the language that's traditionally been there on reporting and transparency with boilerplate language continues to be there. That's a legislative priority. Working on things such as the school aid fund budget, trying to treat all public schools similar to each other instead of picking winners and losers within the education community. With this one-time dollars that are out there, doing an aggressive investment into MIPSers. I've called on $1 billion more for MIPSer payments in terms of paying down long-term debt to help teacher pension debt. There's a half dozen higher education public universities that still have legacy pension debt that's out there. I've called on doing an additional payment of what we saw last year of paying down, I think we paid down $350 million worth of the MIPSer debt in higher education last year, doing an additional payment of $250 million, which means the higher education MIPSer debt's taken care of. Those have been the top issues. Again, I'm not a fan of things such as the $150 million for electric school buses that only get 80-mile range, and I think some of you guys have covered some of the challenges we've seen in Ann Arbor on electric school buses that get limited range and cost $250,000 to $300,000 instead of $50,000 for a school bus. The $150 million that the governor's put out would actually increase per pupil funding $100 per student that all schools could get credit from. But we're putting this out on the table to show that we're ready to find a landing spot on a bipartisan budget. And then the larger general government, the larger budget, continue to put out ideas with a $9 billion surplus that's out there on saying, let's use those dollars for things such as $1.5 billion would fix every local bridge in critical condition in the state, whether it's in Detroit or Marquette, whether it's in Southfield or in St. Joe, that we can get, every bridge, as you guys know, has a condition rating from 0 to 10, and those that are the 0 to 3 rating are in critical condition, and using some of this one-time money to help get those bridges, every bridge, up to good condition, which frees up local dollars to pave more roads, to fix some additional bridges. Other suggestions is such things as, which I don't think is a bipartisan issue at all. Other areas such as the State Parks Trust Fund, that's something where I know Senator Bumstead's been a big advocate on, is trying to say, let's maximize the endowment fund for state parks. We've called on $450 million would provide the full funding in the State Parks Endowment Fund, which means you have a dedicated fund fixing all state parks, using some of the one-time dollars to save general fund dollars, which they say would save $30 to $40 million a year of ongoing. Using fiscally responsible means of one-time dollars to build up some of these funds would save long-term dollars, and I don't think state parks is a partisan issue at all. Continue with the down payments that we saw last year with the bipartisan clean water infrastructure plan that I know Senator Bumstead championed, and I think we got a unanimous vote in the Senate, near unanimous vote in both the House and the Senate on, that invested billions of dollars more in terms of clean water and water infrastructure. Again, shouldn't be a partisan issue in terms of water and wastewater infrastructure, but it's something that we find important in terms of our Senate caucus of providing some of these one-time dollars to fix some of these long-term issues that are out there, and continue to say, hey, let's continue to invest in local roads and in our state infrastructure. So lay that out is that we continue to provide these suggestions and these advice and these policy points from Senate Republicans. I know other Republicans in both the House and Senate have proposed such things as the R&D tax credit. That's something where the governor has mentioned before, that the Republican leader in the House, I know Speaker Tate has, and if you're going to have an R&D tax credit like you've seen in 40 other states that actually tries to incentivize all folks in the knowledge economy instead of picking winners and losers, that I think there's ways to get to a bipartisan deal, but if it's not included in the budget, it's a lot less likely that it's going to be part of any policy bill that's passed. And so we're continuing to work and provide these suggestions, and I know our subcommittee vice chairs have continued to reach out, and we continue to hear crickets from the administration and from the other side in any negotiations on that. And so with that, I'd be happy to open it up to any questions or comments. So
I have a question for the subcommittee vice chairs. Senator Anthony confirmed that spending targets have been released to the subcommittee chairs. Do you have any idea what some of those spending targets are? Have you talked to your respected chairs?
We have not seen those yet. Hopefully we see those this week or first part of next week. If they want a budget done in a couple of weeks, we need to see those sooner than later. We have not seen those yet.
And this is something where even the announcement that there's targets, you guys got before we got. And so we're still waiting to see what those targets are, and I think it's disappointing to see that it's not more of a transparent process in terms of seeing what's actually in these budget plans and what's actually in these targets. And so I want a more transparent and open process.
And we had the vice chairs talk to the chairs up to 2-3 weeks ago, trying to get more information, but it's just, we haven't heard.
How is this different from when it was all Republican control? Some of you guys were in office when it was the other way around. How has this process been different at this stage?
But I think this is one thing is that in 11 and 12, I know a few of us were here, is that we were dealing with a $2 billion budget deficit, and I know that the Governor Whitmer, then the Senate Minority Leader, tried every which way not to get a budget done, that year in 2011, and I'm trying to show that we want to find that bipartisan deal. And I know that that unlike Governor Whitmer and then Senate Minority Leader Whitmer in 2011 and 12 was opposed to getting any kind of budget deal done, I want to see this as a bipartisan budget deal, and I want to see that I think what we're asking for are pragmatic, not Republican or Democrat solutions, but I think Michigan solutions to some of the most pressing problems here in the state of Michigan.
Has it gotten to the point for you all yet where you're willing to talk about withholding immediate effect on this bill?
I want to talk about getting to a bipartisan budget, and and this is something where I found it disappointing and a little disingenuous from Governor Whitmer 2 weeks ago when she was saying that she supported every budget back when she was minority leader, and she voted against every budget when she was minority leader. That then she told the press when they caught her on saying that she told the press that she meant immediate effect, and there was 3 roll call votes on immediate effect in 11 and 12, and she voted against immediate effect. And MERS then covered in May of 2011 that she actually was working to encourage Senate Republican members to vote against immediate effect on the budget. I don't want it to come to that. I think what we're offering, what we've put on the table is, I think, reasonable areas of finding some landing spots on trying to make sure, I mean, some of these areas she ran on fixing the roads, and one of our biggest proposals is trying to fix all the local bridges. And let's have that dialogue. Let's have a seat at the table. Let's do the hard work that's required. And it could be that the three factors within the House and Senate Democrat leadership and the governor's office haven't gotten to a landing spot on some of these other issues. But I think, investing in, paying down, long-term debt by, protecting teacher pensions, I don't think that's a partisan issue. Investing in our state parks and making sure that they're fixed up, that's not a partisan issue. Fixing our local bridges is not a partisan issue. And with a $9 billion surplus that's out there, let's use it wisely and let's invest it wisely.
What's the kind of drawback of, they're not bringing you into the budget process thus far. You don't apparently like the budget bills that they're advancing through the legislature. What would be the reason for you all to not withhold immediate effect, force them to adjourn?
Well, the one constitutional obligation we have is to pass a balanced budget. And I take that seriously. And I think working together, we can get a bipartisan, balanced budget passed that meets some of the requirements of paying down debt, investing in our roads, cleaning up our, water and wastewater infrastructure, and preserve, and trying to make sure that's a sustainable, balanced budget going forward. I don't think that's too much to ask. And I take the role as our constitutional role in the legislature seriously. And I look forward to, I'm an endless optimist that I continue to want to see a landing spot that gets us to a bipartisan consensus.
Leader, Democrats have talked about transparency when it comes to these earmark projects. They have said that they have made it more transparent by releasing them early in different departmental bills. How do you respond to that?
I'd like to see who's asking for what projects and have that member's name show up next to it. If it's not in the bill, at least release an Excel spreadsheet that shows it what member requested what projects. I know I had this conversation with with Leader Hall last year that there does need to be some reforms in terms of the budget process. Does need to be some more transparency on what's actually out there. We still haven't seen what this spending plan will look like, this budget plan will look like, and my hope is that we can get a balanced budget done by the end of the month that's in a more transparent process.
Will the Republicans also seek some of the earmark projects as well, and how would the Republican members make it more transparent?
I would like to see some of these areas that actually invest in all the bridges, all the roads, all the water and wastewater projects in the state of Michigan, and do it through that process. Now, there may be priorities in some of our districts, and that's fine to have. However, I think the larger emphasis that you should take away is that I'm going to continue to look at ways to pay down long-term debt, ways to try to bring up every local bridge into good condition, ways to work on making sure that we have a permanent funding source that takes care of our state parks. And I'm going to continue to find ways to make our state more competitive. And I don't see anything wrong with folks coming in and asking for some specific items, but I think it should be done in a more transparent way than it's been done in the past, whether it's Republican or Democrat leadership. And some of you guys have covered some of those stories that I find it very distasteful on some of these projects that come to light years later or even a year later. And my hope is that it's done in a more transparent manner, and I push the majority party to do it in that way.
Senator Bumstead, are you still meeting with Senator Anthony once a week?
This week we did meet. The previous 2 or 3 weeks we hadn't.
So my big question is, if you're not talking about the budget, if you're not talking about potential spending targets, what do you two talk about?
Generalities right now in the budget. I think they've been waiting for numbers as well from their leadership, but we just don't have those final numbers to get into detail on conversations. And when our minority vice chairs are not engaged at the committee level, it's really difficult to move forward with a lot of these budgets. I just think they need to be included, starting right from the base at the committee level, then bringing it forward through leadership in the process. And they've just been left out of that process right now. Because if you ask our vice chairs, they have no idea what's going on in their budgets, and that's not a good way to run a state.
How important is it to you to get a budget done by July 1st? Is that a goal, or would you be willing to kind of move more into the fall to kind of use your leverage?
Well, I think for local governments and for schools to have a July 1st budget, that I get it for planning and predictability purposes, that July 1st is the ideal time, and that's something where you did see with a Republican trifecta, we were able to get it done by July 1st every year, for 8 years. 2019 was a little bit different of a challenge where, Republican legislature, Democrat governor that didn't seem to want to, compromise and come to a consensus, and then ended up vetoing, 145 line items because it was her way or the highway. And unfortunately, it came to that in 2019 where she ended up vetoing $400 million more for local roads and for autism and for drug abuse centers and other things. And then 2020, of course, with COVID was a little different type of year. And I think last year we tried to get to a more standard spot of trying to get it done. But I think under Governor Snyder, what you saw was the goal of having it done by July 1st, which was very different than under Governor Granholm. And so I would hope that over the next 2.5 weeks, we can have those negotiations, and find a landing spot that actually prioritizes the people of the state of Michigan to pay down long-term debt, invest in our roads and infrastructure, clean up our water and wastewater ways, and treat all public schools similarly.
Senator Nesbitt, is there any specific ways that you would change the process, how it goes so far, to make it more transparent?
Yeah, I think it'd be good to know publicly what these targets are right now. Excuse me. I think it'd be nice to hear back on some of the priorities I've laid out. Where's some counter proposals on those? I don't think any of these that I've laid out are partisan issues. I think they're Michigan issues that are out there. And so I do think you got to show a little grace on both sides of it. And so that's why I continue to be hopeful that we can find a landing spot over the next few weeks, that we find a truly bipartisan budget, and that we're truly entering into these negotiations in a bipartisan way.
Does your presidential primary issue, does that also impact your willingness to give this budget immediate effect?
No, that's a separate issue.
Leader, circling back to the.
And my hope is that, once again, that the governor doesn't just play politics. Like the first issue that they pushed out in January was on presidential politics. And I find it a little disingenuous of them that they're holding a purely political bill over our heads, that we're not able to find a landing spot between the two to make sure that neither side is disenfranchised, and that we provide a primary date that works for both parties. And if President Biden's running for re-election, that he says he is doing, he's announced to do, why is it so important for the Democrats to try to disenfranchise Republican primary voters? And so I've continued to put on the table, make it March 2nd. I'm not the biggest fan of having a Saturday primary. It's something that I know some folks, voter right activists or other Democrats in the past, have opened it up for having a Saturday primary. But it's something where you're making sure that you're not disenfranchising half of the state of Michigan. Republicans will have a competitive primary over the next year. If Biden's running for re-election, I doubt the Democrats, will. So why is it so important that they try to jam it on the Republicans? I find that very partisan and purely political on their end. And it's something where the lineup of the primaries at the national level that was handed down by the Biden White House and them just bowing down to whatever the Biden White House says, I think is wrong. They should listen to the voters here in Michigan and try to work through it. Georgia and New Hampshire are not changing their order, are not changing their primary dates. The DNC has a Rules Committee meeting at the end of this month, and my hope is that they can come back and say, yep, March 2nd sounds like a good date, keeps the same order, and it's something where it doesn't disenfranchise half the state of Michigan.
Are you not supportive of what the Republican State Committee approved on Saturday then?
Well, I'd like to see a full primary for more people involved in the election, but with the way the partisan Whitmer administration is pushing that date, I don't see how they had many options to try to preserve all the all the delegates to go to the national convention. At least they preserve an element of the primary, of the direct vote. I'm not sure what the RNC is going to do in response to that. I think we have a month, part of this month to try to work this out. We'll see what the DNC Rules Committee, does at the end of this month. I believe they're meeting later this month. I continue to offer an olive branch, saying let's just use March 2nd. Let's find a date that works for both parties, keeps the order on the Democrat side, and make sure that we preserve 100% of our delegates to the National Convention.
Later, circling back to the earmark project transparency issue that you mentioned, you have mentioned that there needs to be transparency on both sides. Senator Bumstead has this bill that is, seems to be a long shot to open up the process a little bit more, but lacking that reform, is that not something that legislators themselves can do?
The legislative leadership could do it themselves, and saying that this is part of the process. Is that, what's the project, what's the city, what's the name of the project? I mean, if you're asking for something for either your district or for a city close by, you shouldn't be ashamed of what you're asking for, and you should be proud of what you're asking for. If you're able to, to get a water or wastewater project in your hometown for a few $1 million, why wouldn't you want to, get credit for that? If you're able to secure some money for a local bridge, why wouldn't you want to get credit for that? And so I think it's something where you don't need to even pass something, whether it's a rule or law. You just need to provide that transparency in front of that process. And I think it's a pretty simple thing where I'm sure they'll be building some kind of a spreadsheet list, put the name, the district number on it, and show some transparency on it.
One more quick question, then we gotta go to session.
If it's a good one. Only the best of the questions. So I guess we ran them all out.
Good, thanks.
So,
I was gonna say, was that something you could at least dedicate the Republican side to do that? Like you said, an Excel sheet or something like that to track that with all your requests?
be happy to, bring that up to the caucus and have a conversation, but it's something where you look at the wider, we're not, again, there yet I'm talking about any projects, but I do think that having some elements of transparency, I think is important, and it's likely to be important to lead by on our side. So that's a good conversation to have.
That was a quick one, just want to follow up.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. Wiggins might not call you back at 9 o'clock at night. So
Have they offered any of your members any projects so far?
I'm not
Have any of your members come to you and said, hey, they reached out to me and said they want my vote?
I'm not sure. I haven't
You're
heard.
not sure?
Yeah.
That they have?
I haven't heard. So I know that they've asked some of our members for theirs, but they haven't guaranteed.
Ask them for what they would want.
Yeah.
So can everyone in this room go on the record saying they haven't asked for a special project this year?
What?
Like everyone in this room, have any of you asked for a special project?
I have a question. Did you ask that of the Democrats?
I will later.
Well, I think it's something where and define a project too. And so far this year, in terms of what it is, in terms of what the projects are, I'd be happy to bring something back from this, but I don't think it's something where, as I look at what the priorities are, we need to concentrate on what the priorities are for the state of Michigan.